They said he was too small, that he lacked courage, strength, or any hint of heroism. Bilbo Baggins was just a hobbit from the Shire, a gentle soul who had never drawn a sword or fought in a battle. And yet he changed the fate of Middle-earth. But how did such an unlikely being become one of the most iconic characters ever created by Tolkien in The Lord of the Rings? The answer is more fascinating than it seems, and perhaps it has a lot to do with his own life. Most people believe that to be a hero, you need to be born with a special gift, possess immense strength, or be destined for greatness. But Bilbo teaches us quite the opposite. His journey proves that courage isn't innate, it's built. That fear doesn't have to be an obstacle but can be fuel. That greatness isn't reserved only for kings and warriors, but for those who dare to step outside their comfort zone. And here's the most intriguing part. Bilbo never wanted to be a hero. He wasn't seeking fame, glory, or riches. All he wanted was to return home and live his quiet life. Yet life has a funny way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even when we don't realize it. And sometimes the most unlikely are the curiosities who accomplish the most extraordinary feats. In this journey, we will explore every stage of Bilbo's life, from his reluctant beginnings as a hobbit to his transformation into a living legend. You will discover that his story isn't just a tale of fantasy, it's a powerful metaphor about overcoming obstacles, personal growth, and destiny. And in the end, you might realize that there's a bit of Bilbo Baggins in all of us. Bilbo Baggins was always a peculiar hobbit. Born in the Shire, he had that laid-back air of someone who enjoys a good pipe and hearty meals, but his Took lineage condemned him to something more. Deep down, there was a spark of restlessness, an unconscious desire for adventure, something that made him a little different from other hobbits. And it was precisely that trait that caught the attention of Gandalf, a shrewd wizard who saw beyond appearances and knew that great deeds can come from the most unlikely places. Settled in Bag End, his cozy hobbit hole, Bilbo never imagined that his peaceful life would be interrupted by a band of dwarves invading his home. Imagine savoring a nice piece of cake when suddenly a noisy group appears to turn your routine into an epic. But that's how great journeys begin. Suddenly, without warning, and always with a little nudge from fate, or from a persistent wizard. Gandalf, with his knack for subtle persuasion, planted the seed of adventure in the little hobbit's heart. He knew that Bilbo carried more courage than he himself could perceive. After all, we all have moments when we doubt our own potential, but the truth is that greatness doesn't come from comfort, but from the decision to take that first step. Who would have thought that a homebody hobbit, who enjoyed tea and old maps, could face dangers worthy of legend? Life is full of ironies. When we refuse to leave our comfort zone, we end up missing opportunities that could transform our story. Bilbo, reluctant at first, found himself cornered by his own curiosity. Something inside him wanted to know what lay beyond the hills of the Shire, even if fear tried to pull him back. Who hasn't faced a major decision and felt that flutter of nerves? The problem is never fear itself, but the choice to succumb to it or to move forward. And so, almost without realizing it, Bilbo Baggins was swept into a journey that would change his life forever, and consequently, the destiny of Middle-earth. But he didn't know it yet. At that moment, all he felt was the anxiety of an inexperienced traveler who barely knew what to pack. What would come next? Only the greatest adventure the Shire had ever seen. Bilbo Baggins never imagined he'd be part of such a grand mission. When Gandalf introduced him to Thorin Oakenshield and his band of dwarves, the hobbit didn't seem like the obvious choice for a professional burglar. After all, what could a peaceful resident of the Shire offer to a group determined to face a dragon? But that's where life's great irony comes in. We are often chosen for challenges, not for who we are at the moment, but for who we can become. The dwarves had their reasons to be suspicious of Bilbo. He was small, inexperienced, and had never wielded a sword. But there was something no one saw. True strength isn't always in appearance or experience, but in the ability to adapt and act when the time is right. And so, despite his hesitation, Bilbo accepted the offer and embarked on the journey to Erebor. If you think about it, how many times have we doubted our own abilities before even trying something new? The road to the Lonely Mountain wasn't just a physical path. It was a process of transformation. Bilbo left the Shire as an ordinary hobbit, but every step of the journey shaped a new side of his personality. The challenge of any great adventure isn't only in the external dangers, but in the internal battles we fight along the way. How many times have we felt out of place, insecure, as if we didn't belong where we were? And yet, we keep going. The decision to move forward is what set Bilbo apart from the peaceful life he'd always known. Many times he thought about giving up. Anyone would. But deep down, there was something within him that craved more. And that's true for all of us. There are moments when we face a crossroads and must choose between the comfort of the known and the call of the unknown. Those who dare to answer that call discover a strength they never imagined they possessed. The Hobbit, who once worried only about his garden and his food supply, was now riding alongside warriors, marching toward the impossible. Yet he still didn't know how important he would become on this journey. Fate has a peculiar way of revealing our true role when we least expect it, and for Bilbo, the greatest trial was just beginning. Bilbo Baggins' first major trial came when he and the dwarves encountered something far beyond their expectations: famished trolls. In the Shire, Bilbo's biggest problem was when his tea cooled too quickly, but now he faced 3 enormous creatures who wouldn't think twice about turning him into dinner. Isn't that how life works? One day we're at ease, in the comfort of what we know, and the next we have to fight to survive amidst chaos. The trolls were brutal, clumsy, and fortunately, not very bright. But Bilbo, still trying to prove his worth to the dwarves, boldly decided to steal one of their bags. The problem? He failed. And failure is part of the journey. In the beginning, when we try something new, inexperience can betray us, but that doesn't mean we should give up. Bilbo's, and everyone's, luck was that Gandalf was nearby. The wizard used his cunning to outwit the trolls until the sun rose, turning them to stone. The journey offered no respite, and soon Bilbo would face another danger: goblins in the misty mountains. Unlike the trolls, the goblins were agile, cunning, and hostile. The company was captured and taken to the heart of the mountain, where the great goblin awaited them. Panic spread, and the exit seemed impossible. But remember, the darkest moments often precede the greatest turnarounds. And so, when all seemed lost, Gandalf once again turned the tide, rescuing everyone with a well-timed move. But the experience inside the mountain wasn't just a hasty escape. For Bilbo, it marked the beginning of a transformation. Facing grotesque creatures, surviving the unknown, and dealing with fear were the first steps in becoming a true adventurer. He began to understand that courage isn't the absence of fear, but the ability to act in spite of it. The same applies to any challenge in life. The first obstacles always seem insurmountable until we overcome them and realize what we're made of. What Bilbo didn't know was that the true test awaited him even deeper in the mountain's bowels. If facing famished trolls and bloodthirsty goblins already seemed like the peak of terror, what came next would change not only his journey, but the destiny of all Middle-earth. Deep within the misty mountains, Bilbo Baggins found himself completely alone. Separated from the dwarves, with no idea how to escape that subterranean labyrinth, the Hobbit experienced for the first time the real weight of uncertainty. But it's in moments of solitude that we discover what we are truly made of. And it was there, in absolute darkness, that Bilbo found the most dangerous artifact in the history of Middle-earth: the One Ring. The encounter with Gollum was a battle of wits and words. In a damp, cold cave, 2 small and seemingly insignificant beings engaged in a contest that would alter the course of history. While one tried to outsmart the other, Bilbo realized that intelligence and cleverness are as powerful as any sword. Just like in life, where we often win not by brute force, but by quick thinking and the ability to adapt to circumstances. When Bilbo found the ring, he had no idea of its true nature. The object seemed harmless, a simple, lost trinket. But fate has a curious way of putting the extraordinary in the hands of those who least expect it. With it, Bilbo gained the ability to become invisible, an advantage that saved his life at that moment and would prove to be a trump card on his journey. How many times do we come across opportunities that seem small but, when used wisely, change everything? Escaping the goblins using the ring, Bilbo began to understand the power of cunning over brute force. He wasn't a warrior, but he had enough wits to turn his disadvantages into advantages. That's how it is in life. Often, we underestimate our abilities because they don't fit the traditional mold of strength. But true greatness lies in recognizing and using our unique qualities to our benefit. Bilbo eventually reunited with the dwarves, but something inside him had already changed. The timid hobbit from the Shire now harbored a powerful secret. He didn't yet understand the full significance of the ring, but he sensed that he had crossed a point of no return. The hobbit who had entered the mountain was no longer the same as the one who emerged. And the journey was just beginning. The dark forest did not welcome Bilbo Baggins and the dwarves with open arms. Mirkwood was a gloomy, stifling and treacherous place, where even the sun seemed reluctant to shine. Every step in that dense jungle was a challenge. Every sound in the utter silence carried an unseen threat. And it was there, in the midst of that living darkness, that Bilbo faced his first great test of courage without relying on Gandalf or a stroke of luck. The dwarves, exhausted and starving, were captured by giant spiders, and this time, no one came to their rescue. No wizard to conjure illusions, no warrior to wield a gleaming blade. The responsibility fell entirely on Bilbo, who, for the first time, took up a sword, naming it Sting. He fought alone against the creatures, slicing through webs, distracting the enemies, and above all, conquering his own fear. Because that's what courage truly means, acting in spite of terror. What happened in Mirkwood marked a profound transformation in Bilbo. Until then, he had merely been a travel companion trying to prove his worth. But at that moment, he became a quiet leader, someone the dwarves began to truly respect. And isn't that how it is in life? There are moments when we must take charge, even when no one has given us that role. Before we know it, we realize we're making decisions we never thought we could. But the trials didn't stop there. After facing the spiders, the group was captured again, this time by the woodland elves. Imprisoned in Thranduil's realm, the dwarves were defenseless. Yet Bilbo, now more confident and cunning, used the ring to sneak through the elven fortresses, devising a plan that few would dare try, escaping down the river by hiding in wine barrels. The strategy was risky, but as an old saying goes, sometimes the best escape is the most unlikely one. Emerging from the river's waters, Bilbo was no longer the same hobbit who had left the Shire. He was beginning to understand that he wasn't just a follower on this journey. He was an essential piece of the puzzle. Each challenge overcome molded his character, and with every step, he became someone he'd never imagined he could be. Yet a colossal obstacle still loomed ahead, a creature that turned men and kingdoms to ashes. No creature inspired as much fear as Smaug, the dragon of the lonely mountain. His name was whispered in fear, his flames had reduced cities to rubble, and his treasure amassed over the centuries gleamed like a cursed gold. And it was none other than Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit from the Shire who had never seen a dragon before, who was chosen to confront the beast in its own lair. If there's a lesson in this, it's that fate has a sharp sense of humor. With the ring granting him invisibility, Bilbo stealthily descended into the treasure hall. There lay Smaug, slumbering atop countless piles of gold, jewels, and ancient armor. The sight was as magnificent as it was dangerous. A single misstep could mean the end for the little burglar. But Bilbo was no longer the frightened hobbit at the beginning of his journey. He knew that strength wasn't solely in the sword, but in the mind. Instead of attacking or fleeing, he chose a different path: dialogue. Talking to a dragon is a perilous game, but Bilbo played it well. He chose his words cleverly, flattered the beast, stroked its pride, and during the conversation managed to observe a crucial detail: a flaw in Smaug's supposedly impenetrable armor. Amid such grandeur, a small, vulnerable spot could decide the fate of an entire city. And isn't that how life is? Often the key to overcoming great challenges is noticing the small details that everyone else overlooks. Bilbo escaped by a hair's breadth, but his discovery wasn't in vain. He relayed the information to his companions, and it was thanks to that detail that Bard, the archer of Lake Town, was able to bring down the dragon with a single, well-aimed arrow. What seemed impossible became reality, and Smaug's era of terror came to an end. All because a curious hobbit dared to pay attention where no one else did. Sometimes true power isn't in who wields the sword, but in who sees what no one else does. With Smaug dead, the Lonely Mountain now belonged once again to the dwarves. But Bilbo knew that a new danger was forming. Gold awakens greed, and where there is greed, there is war. The greatest battle of the journey was yet to come, and the hobbit, who never wanted to be a hero, soon found himself in the midst of a conflict that could destroy everything they had achieved. With Smaug out of the picture, the Lonely Mountain was supposed to be the restored home of the dwarves, but reality proved far more complicated. The dragon's death brought not peace, but covetousness. Erebor's vast treasure attracted not only the surviving people of Lake Town, who had lost their homes, but also elves, orcs, and other forces who saw an opportunity in that mountain. And amidst it all, Bilbo Baggins realized something that everyone else seemed to ignore. War was forming right before his eyes. At the center of all this tension was the Arkenstone, the most precious jewel of the dwarves, coveted by Thorin Oakenshield, is a symbol of his royal lineage. But the obsessive quest for the artifact began to consume Thorin. He was no longer the same leader who had set out on the journey. His heart was now poisoned by greed, and he refused to share any part of the treasure. And Bilbo, who had never cared for gold, understood that the price of such wealth could be far greater than anyone imagined. Making a decision that required more courage than any battle, Bilbo did the unthinkable. He handed over the Arkenstone to Bard, the leader of the men of Lake Town, in an attempt to negotiate peace. This was not just an act of bravery, but of emotional intelligence. He knew that fighting over gold was senseless, and that a true leader isn't defined by what he possesses, but by what he is willing to let go. And how many times in life do we face that dilemma? Cling to something out of pride, or let it go for the greater good? Unfortunately, Thorin did not see Bilbo's gesture as an act of wisdom. He saw it as betrayal. The friendship built over the course of the journey was shaken, and the hobbit was expelled from the dwarves' camp. But fate didn't wait for them to resolve their differences. When they least expected it, orcs and wargs marched on the mountain, forcing everyone to unite in battle. Thus was born the Battle of the Five Armies, an epic conflict where elves, men, and dwarves had to fight side by side against a common enemy. In the end, Thorin, on the brink of death, acknowledged that Bilbo had been right all along. In his final breath, he made peace with the hobbit, leaving behind the lesson that true wealth isn't in gold, but in the bonds we build. Bilbo, who had never sought fortune or glory, now carried with him a lesson few truly understand. The value of things isn't measured by their shine, but by the impact they have on our lives. And his journey, though nearing its end, was far from over. After everything he had been through, dragons, battles, kings, and betrayals, Bilbo Baggins finally returned home. But the Shire was no longer the same. Or rather, he was no longer the same. As he marched back to Bag End, one thought lingered. Did he still belong in that place? Because the truth is, after great journeys, we never come back the same. What once seemed enough no longer fills us in the same way. Anyone who's changed and returned to the same surroundings knows exactly what that means. Upon his arrival, Bilbo was in for a shock. His house was being auctioned off. To the hobbits, he had been presumed dead, and his belongings were being contested as relics of someone who would never return. Imagine setting out on an adventure and upon your return, discovering that the world had moved on without you. But that is the reality for those who choose the path of transformation. People around us don't always understand our change. Some even try to fit us back into the old version of who we once were. Bilbo, however, refused to be consumed by frustration. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone. The gold of Erebor meant little to him, and he wasn't seeking recognition. His true wealth wasn't in overflowing coffers, but in the experiences he had lived. And here lies a powerful lesson. Often, the greatest rewards don't come in the form of money or status, but in the wisdom gained along the way. Those who learn to see value beyond the material discover a treasure no one can take away. In the eyes of the Shire, Bilbo had become somewhat of an eccentric. He no longer fit into the predictable routine of other hobbits. And isn't that true of those who dare to dream beyond the ordinary? Those who break the mold are often seen as strange. But what others didn't understand was that Bilbo had experienced something they never would: the feeling of living beyond what was expected. He met kings, saw cities burn, faced legendary creatures, and survived. That in itself was a legacy. And so Bilbo resumed his life in the Shire, but he carried a secret within him. He was no longer just an ordinary hobbit. He was now the bearer of a ring that, unbeknownst to him, would bring many more twists to come. Because no matter how much we try to return to normal after a great journey, there's always something that reminds us that the story isn't over. Years passed, and Bilbo Baggins, the hobbit who once left the Shire without ever knowing how to wield a sword, became a living legend. But fate never allows great journeys to end simply. Even though he had returned to his hole, his mind never completely left the paths he'd trodden. And like every great adventurer, he began to feel the weight of all that he had lived through. Because the true challenge isn't just in setting out, it's learning how to live once everything has passed. Life in the Shire returned to its slow, peaceful rhythm, yet Bilbo never fully fit in. He no longer belonged solely to that place, and deep down, he knew it. He spent long hours writing about his adventures, recording every detail of the journey so that no one would forget. And here's another great lesson. Extraordinary experiences shouldn't be kept to ourselves. Sharing what we've learned can transform lives, and Bilbo, perhaps without even realizing it, became a storyteller, someone who immortalizes knowledge through words. But there was something that troubled him: the One Ring. For years, Bilbo kept that object with him, not fully understanding its true power. He believed it was just a trick ring, a curious artifact that had helped him in hard times. Yet, little by little, he realized that the ring was not merely an innocuous item. There was something about it that made him uneasy, as if a silent shadow was always following him. How many times in life do we hold on to something we think is a blessing, but that, deep down, is slowly corroding us? It wasn't until Gandalf returned that the truth began to reveal itself. The ring was far more than a simple magical object. It carried a burden that even Bilbo didn't fully understand. And at that moment, he made a decision that few would be capable of. He let the ring go. Renouncing something that has become a part of you is never easy, but Bilbo proved that true strength lies in knowing when to let go. A lesson that few learn in life. Bilbo departed for Rivendell, where he finally found peace among the elves. He spent his final years away from the turmoil of Middle-earth, yet with the flame of adventure still burning in his eyes, until, in his old age, he received a special invitation. The chance to embark on the final great journey, a voyage to the Undying Lands. And so, he set out one last time, crossing the sea toward the unknown. Because the true essence of an adventurer isn't found in the destination, but in the eternal desire to keep exploring. Bilbo Baggins never wanted to be a hero, yet the journey transformed him into one. He left the Shire as an ordinary hobbit, and returned as someone who had faced dragons, endured battles, and carried a secret that would change the history of Middle-earth. But what makes his story so powerful is that it isn't just about adventure, it's about transformation. And, in the end, isn't that what we all seek? To grow, to overcome, and to prove to ourselves that we are capable of more than we ever imagined. Now think about your own life. How many times have you found yourself turning down an opportunity for fear of the unknown? How many times have you chosen the comfort of what you know, even when you felt that something greater awaited beyond the borders of your comfort zone? Bilbo wasn't the strongest, nor the most prepared, but he took that first step. And that's the only difference between those who live great stories and those who merely watch them unfold. What can you do today to leave your hole and embark on your own journey? Maybe there isn't a dragon waiting for you, but surely there are challenges that demand your courage. Perhaps no wizard is knocking at your door, but there are signs all around you that it's time for a change. So, the question remains, will you wait for adventure to find you, or will you take the initiative and seek it out? If you want to keep learning about the great stories and lessons that the Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's work teach us, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. There's a vast world of knowledge waiting for you, and this journey is just beginning.